Now I'd like to take a question from the lady over here.
Thank you. Governor Huckabee, my name is Kirsten Lombard. I'm here from Madison, Wisconsin today on behalf of a large group of top experts and education activists who are fighting false education reform across the United States, literally across the United States. And I would like to ask you very specifically about something that two phrases that are uttered regularly across the United States today, economic development and workforce development. The members of my group, Truth in American Education, are deeply concerned about these phrases because they affect education. Common Core has become a linchpin piece of workforce and economic development. We are slotting children into careers before they ever have a chance. We are limiting their opportunities, their career opportunities, their educational opportunities before they ever have a chance to decide for themselves what they could be happy doing for a lifetime. That is horrifying in a country that supposedly believes in self-determination. If you are elected president, what will you do to roll back something that ultimately amounts to planned or managed economy, workforce and economic development? What will you do to roll it back, not only at the national level, but how will you encourage the rollback in states across the United States where governors have been directly co-opted for these managed economy systems?
Let me be very clear, because I get asked a lot, what would you do with education as president? Look, as governor, I dealt with education a lot because 70 cents out of every dollar of our general revenue went to education, K through 12 and college. So it's a huge part of what we spent money for. But let me tell you something. When I get asked, what would you do as president with education? I tell you what I do. I would do everything I could to have the federal government have nothing to do with education because there is no constitutional authority or role for the federal government to be involved in how you educate your kids. It is a mom and dad decision. It is a local school board decision. It is a state decision. It is not a federal decision. We shouldn't have a Department of Education. And if there is such a thing, the only purpose that it should have whatsoever is to be a center of best practices so that states could get information if they wanted to. But frankly, that can be done through the National Governors Association, which already exists. Common Core has become a cancer in the education community because it has defied the very nature of what it was intended to be, which was supposed to be state control standards in two things, language arts and math, and it became a Frankenmonster. It's no longer that. It's data collection, it's curriculum. None of that was a part of the original plan that was supposed to have been to keep it out of the federal hands. So it needs to die. But it has to die at the hands of the state governments. And I think the next president needs to say, hands off of the federal government in dictating education policy, education curriculum. It is not our purview, it is not our authority, and frankly, we don't have the money to dictate it if we did want to take that authority. And we really do need to push for people in their communities to take a much stronger voice and role in the area of education. You brought up about the workforce and particularly the slotting, and I think that's especially dangerous for younger kids because, frankly, nobody knows when a kid's 13, 14, 15 years old what his potential is. Nobody knows.
In my own state, they are already assisting children as young as the 6th grade in writing academic and career plans.
And that's ridiculous. That is utterly ridiculous. We need to be giving a broad, rigorous curriculum so that kids can experience the full scope and spectrum of all different types of of academic disciplines, including music and the arts. And let me say, one of the things that I did champion as a governor was music and art education for kids, because a third of our kids are right brain dominant kids. They don't think logically, they think creatively. There's a very different approach they take. We lose 1 in 3 kids in this country to being dropouts, and it's not because they're dumb, they're bored. They're just bored silly because we're not touching their talents. And our education system, I hate to use a rock and roll metaphor or analogy, but here goes. If you ever remember the Pink Floyd album, Another Brick in the Wall, perhaps you'll remember the song and the imagery of the video where the kids are on a conveyor line and education is essentially just a process. And they really nailed it. Who would have thought that some of the greatest critics of education policy would be a British rock band? But that's really, they nailed it. Kids should not be treated as pawns on an assembly line. Which is what happens when people start deciding what they're going to believe, what they're going to be in life. And the best way to get rid of that is to get those decisions closer to home and get the federal government out of it, because there's nobody sitting in Washington knows your kids better than you do. Nobody sitting in Washington cares and loves your kids as much as you do. And therefore, we should never, ever surrender the future of our children to somebody who's never been to your town, never met your kids, and has no vested interest in how they turn out. And that's why it needs to be at the local level.
Yeah. May I just say, Governor Huckabee, and I've spoken to a lot of groups around this country, and a lot of people would say to me, we like Mike Huckabee, but this Common Core thing.
Yeah.
He supported Common Core when he was governor of Arkansas. So am I right in saying that you initially supported it, but it wasn't what it became? It was, you saw it as something that would raise standards. Were you fooled by the bureaucrats, or do you think it genuinely morphed?
Well, first of all, Common Core didn't exist during my tenure as governor. That term and that very essence came into being in about 2009, but it was the outgrowth of what was a part when I was governor back in the mid-90s called Achieve, and the concept was, let's make sure that states control education, let's not let the federal government get their hands all over it. And that was the essence. By the way, it was led by Republican governors. It was not led by Democrats, largely, by Republicans, and people who believed in school choice, people who believed in local control of education. Common Core became sort of the outgrowth of that, and originally it was limited to language arts and math and standards only standards. It had nothing to do with curriculum. And it was designed so that states would be able to say that there was some semblance of standard, so that if a child went to a school in Oregon and finished the 3rd grade, and then his parents moved to Georgia, that the student would be somewhat at the same grade level, because you don't want a kid moving and suddenly he's way over his head and he's going to fail, or he's so much advanced in the kids that he's bored to death. The concept was noble, but then here's what happened. The Department of Education at the federal level got involved. They started tying Common Core to federal funding for Race to the Top funds. And then they started adding things that were not standards of those 2 issues. They started adding things like history and social studies, which was never a part of it. Then they added curriculum, and then ultimately what really got dangerous was things like data collection, and it became totally a lost cause and out of control. That's why, like Frankenstein, when the monster gets out of control, you kill the monster. And folks, there's no way to salvage Common Core. It's become a Frankenstein. It's time to kill it and do something different. That's simple as I can put it.